but I've been a regular visitor of all the other workshops. And so far I really enjoyed this one, so I'm really happy to see that now in Asia we have a very, very good example of a neuromorphic workshop. So thanks for organizing it, and thanks for inviting me. So I'm glad that my talk is after Giacomo's, because he introduced all the kind of work that I do already. He spent like half of his talk convincing you that this approach makes sense. And half of that was about sensory motor loops. But he didn't show as much about sensory motor loops, so I'm going to show you something practical in that sense. And that's just an example of some previous work that I've done, but most of the talk will focus on event-based vision for egomotion estimation. I still want to spend a few words telling you what kind of research my group does. So my group does fundamental research. We're trying to understand how the brain works. And we do this by emulation of neural function, and this is already covered very well by Giacomo's introduction, all the advantage that you heard about, the fact that time represents itself, the fact that we don't have clocks, the fact that the physics of the CMOS is reproducing the biological evidences, and so on. We do this with full custom CMOS systems. As you heard, we use sub-threshold analog and asynchronous digital. And in the recent past, we have been joining the CMOS perspective together with the memory stiff novel device, so trying to bring the two worlds together. As those of you doing full custom CMOS with sub-threshold analog and asynchronous digital already know, this is a very painful approach. It takes time, it takes money, and you need several iterations to get to something that is really doing what you planned originally. So if we have ideas that we want to test, we don't go directly through that path, but we first use classical tools like digital processors for fast prototyping of these ideas. So we do, in contrast to emulation, what we call simulation of neural networks. And this is, if you want, a more conservative approach. And examples of tools that we have been using is the Intel OE chip and the Spinnaker platform as well. So by using these tools and this approach in our core research, we look at two streams of research. The first one, we call it System and Theories for Brain-Inspired Computation. Today, I'm not going to touch on that. But it's, again, close to what Giacomo was showing you, learning, winner-take-all networks, recurrent neural networks, and so on. Today, I will focus more on sensing and actuating. So let's start with sensing. If you think about the 5 senses, it's really easy to have an idea of the fact that the spatial-temporal dynamic of the signal play an important roles and carry a lot of information. So if you think about vision, like when things are moving, how your different sensors in the retina are stimulated over time. If you think about touch and you're doing some texture perception, how you generate a spatial-temporal activation of your sensors. If you think about audition, you have a frequency map, and different frequencies are activated at different times. So spatial-temporal activation of your sensor plays an important role in encoding sensory signals. Because of that, we developed our own computational element to encode these spatial-temporal features. And we named it Time Difference Encoder, in short TDE. And I'm going to explain you the detail of the model. So imagine that you have 2 input channels, and there might be spikes on these 2 input channels. So you see these 2 vertical lines are 2 spikes happening in these 2 input channels. So now when a spike occurs in the first channel, we sample time. So we change the value of a variable. In CMOS, we put charge on a capacitor. And then over time, we let this variable decay. So in CMOS, we let charge leak away from the capacitor. So if now I get a spike from the second channel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample the value of this analog variable and use it as a synaptic weight for a synapse. So I modulate the strength of a synapse. The synapse is only going to respond to this spike. In response to this spike, there is going to be an excitatory postsynaptic current generated, and the amplitude of this current is modulated by the analog variable here. So I'm going to show you a concrete example of the outcome of this. So of course, first of all, we named the two channels. We named them facilitatory and trigger. So the trigger channel is the one that is generating the current, while the facilitatory channel in black is the one that is generating the internal variable. And of course, this element is directional. If you have that the trigger spike comes before the facilitatory one, the analog variable is at 0. So there is no current generated, and that's what you see here. If instead you have the right order, when the trigger spike comes, an excitatory postsynaptic current is generated. This current is then fed into a neuron, and here you see the membrane potential of the neuron generating a lot of spikes, and here you see the spikes generated. And now, of course, if you change the time difference between the two events, the sampling of the variable will obtain a lower value. Therefore, the amplitude of the current will be smaller. Therefore, you get less spike. And if you further increase the time difference, you get even more spikes, and eventually you get no spikes at all. So this is very important, and I forgot to ask you to interrupt at any time. If you have any doubt on this, ask now, because otherwise you're going to be lost for the rest of the talk.
So the reason that the membrane voltage decreases is because of the spikes being generated. Otherwise,
that's the reset. You can see it here. That's really the reset after the spike. That's correct. Any other doubt? Okay, so we have several implementations of this computational element. Of course, we have a CMOS circuit implementation. Unfortunately, we still don't have a big array of those. So we have done very little experiments in CMOS, but I'm going to show you CMOS data. We have implemented it on FPGA, on Spinnaker, on Loihi. That's all hardware kind of implementation, but we have also software implementation, for example, in Brian, Nengo, and PyTorch. So now we're going to move to vision, even though we apply this computational element to all human senses except for taste. So we have done vision, audition, touch, and olfaction. So most of you are already familiar with event-based vision sensor, and so you are already familiar with the fact that if you have an event-based camera that is, for example, mounted on a car, so with its own Egomotion, what you will see is edges moving in your visual field. So that's what you see here. So the black and white are the on and off events that are showing you the edges of objects present in the environment. This gives you information about motion, both in terms of self-motion, but also in terms of where objects are. And in this first part of the talk, I'm going to focus on motion flow for obstacle avoidance. So you're all familiar with the fact that if you're sitting on a train and the train is traveling, you will see that the trees nearby the track train are going to move very fast in your visual field, while objects in the further landscape, like the mountains or the houses, they're going to move very slowly in your visual field. It is very well understood that insects use this to avoid obstacles. So they would fly away from objects that move very fast in their visual field because those objects are the ones that are close by. And this is also based on what has been observed in the brain of the insect, so the so-called elementary motion detector or Reichard detector. And we created a model of the elementary motion detector based on the TDE. So we called it spiking EMD. And so now if you think about so this block would be the TDE. And if you think now about attaching the two input channel of the TDE to two pixels, when an object will be moving, I will get a lot of spikes from this TDE if the object is moving very fast. and I will get fewer spikes if the object is moving very slowly. So in that sense, the output of this spiking elementary motion detector will give me an estimate of the distance of the objects. So I will want to avoid region of the space where I see a lot of spikes.
So this 2 input connected to 2 pixels, that's what you mean?
Yes, 2 pixels, and you have to imagine an object moving by. And then a lot of spikes means fast object, and because the motion is generated by your Egomotion, fast object means close object, as long as you are moving in a translational motion. So we put this idea and a quite simple neural network. The talk doesn't focus on this work, but I have the citation here, so I encourage you to read the paper if you're interested in the topic. I'll only show you a few things about this work. So we use a DVS camera from Toby's lab. We use the Spinnaker system for the brain of the robot, and we use FPGA for the motor control. And this sensory motor closed loop system is spiking from the sensor to the actuator. We do everything with spikes. And I just show you. So because this is insect inspired, unfortunately it's not flying, but we replicate experiments that are normally done in biology. So for example, flying in a tunnel. So you have the robot flying in a corridor with high contrast walls, and then we look at how the robot behaves, and we compare that with biology. And of course we have similar things like, the robot is going to center into the corridor as the insect would do if they see the same level of contrast. And this is just to show you that the robot also functions properly in a more natural environment. And then we use this platform to make hypotheses about biology. And here I'm going to show you just one example. So I told you to do the obstacle avoidance in this context. What you need to do is to avoid region of space where you see a lot of spikes. So it's natural to use a Wiener-Tekol, in this case an inverted Wiener-Tekol, because we have to find the region of space where there are less spikes. So we use an inverted Wiener-Tekol. And how far I want to be from obstacles depend, of course, from the spread of the lateral inhibition. So I need a minimum spread of lateral inhibition, which is representing my body size. So I need to make sure I only enter into corridors that are at least my body size or a little bit more. But I can also modulate this lateral inhibition to decide how risk averse I want to be. So for example, if I'm an insect in this tunnel, and there is no food at the end of the tunnel, so I cannot smell anything useful, I might decide to stay here. And that's the yellow trajectory of our robot in this case. But if I need food and I smell food, I'm going to take the risk and go at the end of the tunnel. So these three trajectories in yellow, red, and black show what happens to our robot if you only change the spread of lateral inhibition. So 0 is like no lateral inhibition, 2 is you go to the first neighbors, and 4 you go to the second neighbors. So this could be something that biologists could go back and look into the biological system to see if there is any change of spread of lateral inhibition in terms of different states of the insect, in terms of looking for food or not looking for food. As I said, this is just one example. There is much more in the paper. And now I'm going to give you a short summary of what we showed with this work. So we showed that a complex system with animal-alike behavior can emerge by combining local neuron units in a bio-inspired architecture. Obstacle avoidance was performed in this case with about 4K neurons and 400K synapses. Maybe a few words about that. We never program the obstacle avoidance behavior per se. What I mean with can emerge by combining local neural units is that we add all blocks of computation, like the TDE for doing the motion estimation, the Wiener-Tekol for finding the region of space with less motion, but we didn't explicitly program obstacle avoidance. We just tuned each block to do the computation that we knew was needed for obstacle avoidance, and then everything else emerged. we implemented this architecture in a distributed, parallel, and asynchronous neural system, robustly performing biological relevant tasks in closed-loop experiments, end-to-end spiking neuromorphic from the sensing to the motor commands. In addition to the initial concept, once hyperparameters are tuned to achieve desired behavior of local neural units, different tasks can be performed in a variety of environments. So that goes back to the emergence of behavior with the same single set of parameters. So we believe this is an indication of the identification of robust computational principles. So not only we don't program explicitly the obstacle avoidance, we just tune parameters of the blocks, we put them together, then we expose the robot to many different tasks. So we have navigation in a cluttered environment, we have this tunnel, we have a choice of two apertures in an arena with a wall in the middle, and we don't change anything. But in every single environment, we see behaviors that are very similar to what is observed in biological systems. So by doing that, we can come up with reasonable hypotheses and prediction that can be then validated with neuroscience experiments. So we believe this kind of work can go from neural to artificial systems back again. And when I say from neural, I mean that we build the brain of the robot because of what we knew from biology. So we made, of course, a lot of simplification, but we built a system that was inspired by biology, and we had to fill gaps in terms of knowledge. And we hope that at the end, we can produce then hypotheses that can help filling these gaps by doing neuroscience experiments. So as I told you, we put these systems in CMOS. And I thought I have to show some circuits. So we had already made 2 iterations of the circuit. You might recognize this part of the circuit is the TD, the DPI synapse that Giacomo was showing you. And then we have an input part here that is generating the variable that keeps track of time. And then this variable is modulating the strength of the DPI synapse. That was the first implementation that we did. We later realized that this was maybe a bit too simplistic, and we decided to replace the input block with another DPI synapse. So also the variable that keeps track of time is implemented with a DPI circuit. We put that on CMOS, and we also did, this part is on simulation, but we did a comparison in terms of device mismatch. And this is the previous work, and this is the current work, and this is a plot of the charge on the capacitor across time. And you see that the variability was much more compared to the variability now. We still don't fully understand why. I show this to Toby, and of course the first thing he asks is how come it's totally counterintuitive, because here you have more transistor than here, so mismatch could be worse. We have been discussing ideas, so Giacomo is thinking in the line of this is a linear behavior, here you have an exponential, that could be the reason of the improvement in terms of mismatch behavior, but we still have to figure out where it comes from. But the good news is that the new circuit is much better in terms of device mismatch. And now here you see data from the latest design, where we show similar experiment to what I was explaining before. We have the facilitatory spike in black, the trigger spike in red. So as before, here you have the 2 spikes, and then depending on the delta t between the 2 spikes, you have less and less event for increasing delta t. The blue is the membrane potential acquired from the chip. And here you see how then, if you repeat this experiment many times, you could either measure the latency of the first spike, or you could count the number of spikes. So you have number of spikes here, and you have latency here, and you see that they are both encoding the delta t between the 2 events. And you might also notice that you get higher precision if you count spikes, if the delta t is small, And you get higher precision if you look at the latency, if the delta t is long. So maybe a combination of the two would give you high precision in any situation. And here we also compare a simulation, so a software simulation on a computer with the circuit to show that we have a quite reasonable representation of what the circuit does in a software simulation. So now we use this concept for something else. It's still related to an event-based vision camera moving in the environment and therefore generating motion flow. But this time what we want to do is we want to estimate the Egomotion. So I told you that the motion flow gives you a sense of the distance of objects, but of course is also highly related to your own velocity. So then the next question we ask is, okay, can we use the motion flow to do Egomotion estimation? And again, we have a similar concept as before. You have 2 pixels in a DVS or any event-based sensors, and you attach 1 pixel to the facilitator, the other one to the trigger. So in this case, a TDE connected to this 2 channel will be sensitive to motion that goes in that direction. And then we took a data set from a car driving, so the same, similar to what I showed before. So this is the MVSEC data set. And what I didn't mention so far is that in the last chip, we only have 1 TDE. We don't have an array of them, but we wanted to show a proof of principle that a system built on CMOS with this TDE could perform Egomotion estimation on such a data set. So because we only have 1 circuit, for each TDE that we put in our algorithm, we have to serially run the experiment. So for example, what we do here to reduce the time of the experiment is, first of all, we reduce the visual field to these 2 blocks, the black and the red. And now we're interested in rotation. So what we do is we randomly place TDE, either left to right or right to left, to estimate the motion in this direction. And we do it in 2 small areas of the visual field. So in principle, you could be very pessimistic and expect that you're going to have very bad performance, but let's see. So this is the kind of data that you get. The first row is the DVS pixels. So you have blue for this area of the visual field and red for the other area. Then here you have the right to left TDE response in that block of the visual field, and then the left to right. And now what you can do is subtract the 2. So basically you can put everything together for right to left and left to right, and then do a subtraction. And this should give you an estimate of the net motion, or the net angle in this case. And so what you see here is the outcome of this experiment run on CMOS, in which you have time on the x-axis, and here you have the derivative of the angle, and you have different traces. You have the IMU data that was, of course, on the car. The dataset also provides ground truth. And then you have what our simulation on the computer does and what the data from the chip does in red. And then if you look at the angle estimation, as you all know, IMU is going to have a drift, so it's going to go far away from the ground truth over time, and our result is between the IMU and ground truth. And to give you an idea of one of the advantages of the approach on CMOS, we also show the power consumption here, which is of the order of hundreds of picowatt. So that was a very limited set of data, only 1 car drive and only a very limited region in the visual field of the camera. We used the simulation to expand the experiment. So this is now, first of all, the data you saw before was the initial part of this drive. Now you see 4 different examples of the drive of the car that are more representative of different conditions. For example, there is one that is very, very difficult. It's during the night, but I don't think that's what making it difficult, because others during the night are quite easy. I think what makes it difficult is the car is going really straight, so the angle to be estimated is very small. And what you see in this particular example is that we do as bad as IMU. We don't improve on IMU, while generally our result is always in between ground truth and IMU. So we provide an improvement of IMU. In general, we don't intend to replace IMU, but we intend to complement it. There are several situations in which this is useful. I haven't mentioned something important so far, and you might be asking yourself a question, and maybe you should ask me as well. Yes?
What if the environment is dynamic, other agents moving?
Yeah, this is related to what I didn't mention. What I didn't mention is that what I showed you is that I collect a bunch of spikes, and then I do a subtraction. And then I get number of spikes again. But then I'm telling you that I can estimate the derivative of an angle, and I can estimate an angle. But in principle, I have no knowledge of the relationship between my number of spikes and the angle. And that's related to your question, because if my environment changes, this relationship is also going to change, highly probably. So what I didn't tell you is that there is a scaling. So it's mentioned in the legend there. So in this first example, we're doing a fixed scaling. Basically, we're using the IMU data to decide what 10 spikes means in terms of an angle. And this is still going to be affected by the problem that you're mentioning. In principle, we were optimistic with the fact that we are doing a subtraction. So the fact that we are doing a subtraction should get rid of most of what comes from changes in the environment, because this is going to bring the mean level of activation up or down, and then when you do the subtraction, you get rid of it. But nevertheless, we think that the system will not be so robust to these kind of things. And plus, it's not really realistic to do the fixed scaling, because to do the fixed scaling, you cannot do an online thing. You will have to acquire all the data, figure out minimum and max, and then scale by that. So we went further with this work, and we implemented a scaling that is now happening online, again based on the IMU data. But now this time what you can do is dynamically adapt your scaling depending on what is happening in your environment. So in this way you will be more robust to that. And this is a very nice result here, because now when it is a very difficult task, we can improve on IMU. And of course, we are going to always be either like IMU or better. We cannot be worse because we use the IMU data, so we have that information. But it's really nice that we can improve it to that level in very difficult examples. And this is to show you comparison with state-of-the-art similar algorithm. Of course, we restricted ourselves in this comparison to event-based approach. So the first line is our work with the fixed scaling, and the second line is our work with online scaling. And I'm going to guide you through the difference. So first of all, yeah, our work with online scaling is the best performing one, and already the one with fixed scaling is very good, but of course you couldn't do online applications. And there are cases in which is really, order of magnitude better than the other approaches. But then the interesting question is how different we are. And with the first look, you see that we are totally orthogonal. So what are those column. So the E is event-based. You might be aware that despite many people are using event-based camera, they immediately discard the event-based approach. So it's very common to collect events into frames. And in my opinion, by doing this, you quickly get rid of some of the advantages. So we don't do that. So in this column, you see that we are the only one that have the full algorithm being event-based, not only the sensing part. Then the second one is learning. I mean, we have been talking about learning in this workshop already a lot, and learning is very powerful. But there are problems in which you don't, you can solve them without learning. And if you can, it's probably better. So in this case, we don't have any learning. The advantage is that we don't need data to train our system. We can just set up our system and have it plug and play. And then the last thing is what I already mentioned extensively, which is we do use IMU data, and that means we are not targeting a replacement of IMU, but we are targeting augmentation of what IMU can give you. And as I said before, there are applications in which this is very useful. Any questions? Yes, one and then two.
What about the number of TDEs you use, and did you check performance as a function of the amount of TDEs?
Yeah, I don't have the... So the numbers, we can see them here. So for the small system, it was 50. That's why I said it would be very surprising that that works. In principle, it would be nice to keep this kind of approach where not only you look at a small region, but you also have a sparse sampling of your visual field, because here we don't cover everything. So it's very good news that with a small number, we already have decent performance. Of course, the more you put there, the better precision you're going to have. But if you think about, application at the edge with limited power available, it's good to know that you can have a sparse approach.
The insects have an additional aspect of sacrificing resolution using the for making each element in motion detector more relevant to the scene.
Yeah, we haven't got in that direction yet. I'm going to show you more things that are inspired by the insect, but we haven't looked at those kind of things yet. There was another question?
Yeah. Any comment on non-rigid environments?
Sorry,
non-rigid environments.
Yeah, when objects are moving, yes.
Olfaction only is more concerned with that. I mean, many animals, many creatures quite sensitive to that.
So here in general, you might have problems where objects are moving.
Not moving, diffuse. Olfaction is concerned with diffusion environment. And density, for example, is the smell coming from this side or this side, things like that.
Yeah, so we have applied this to olfaction. I'm not sure I understand how that relates to this work, but when we applied it to olfaction, we have, for example, a small robotic platform with two sensors, and just two sensors, and then with the TDE, we can measure the fact that the odor is presented first to this sensor and then to this one. And then if the robot is looking for the gas source, the robot is going to turn to the right. And then you can apply biologically inspired strategies like, this rotation and then following the gradient and then rotation again to find the odor plums again. But the temporal dynamics are very different. So there we talk about seconds, while here we are around the milliseconds. But we did apply the TDA also in olfaction for example, for gas sensing lateralization. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but we can talk in the break. Yes.
Your TDEs are all aligned in precisely in the XY direction, right? If you go back to the slide.
Give me time. I think you're gonna.
Offset,
Yeah.
So the regions what they chosen randomly, or does it only work for that particular stone regions? The TDE and the input signal?
What do you mean by that particular sequence? So you need 2 spikes to generate some response?
The region in the image, is it chosen randomly, or does it
So we just chose a region that we knew would carry a lot of information. We just wanted to show a proof of principle, so we didn't test change in this region, because we tested this and then we tested the network that covers the full space, and we showed that there is improvement, but it's not huge improvement, so it really doesn't make sense to, because this experiment with the hardware is very time consuming, so we did it only once, only with a set of these regions. Okay, let me continue to the next part. So as I said, we take a lot of inspiration from biology, in particular from insects, and we wanted to see, okay, now this was a very simple example, but imagine you have a drone or you have a fruit fly, they are flying, they have to be sensitive to several directions of motion. I believe this relates to your question. If it doesn't, we can go back to your question later on. So it is reasonable to assume that insects have so-called match filters that match the kind of motion that they produce while flying. So this is an example of the kind of motion that would be perceived on the eye of the insect in case of a rotation. So you will have higher motion here and lower here. And if you look at biology, you do see that the T4 and T5 neurons, which are those that are sensitive to motion in the 4 cardinal direction, their output is collected by neurons, the VS neuron, that really looks like sampling the whole visual field. So this is compatible with this idea of the match filters that I showed you before. So we started saying, okay, let's make our 2 filters that before were very simple a bit more complex and a bit more structured. For example, I can build a forward and a backward filter. I always need a complementary. Before it was left, right, right, left. Now it could be forward and backward motion, or clockwise and anti-clockwise motion. So I can now think that I can have any match filter, and I can apply this concept of making the difference, and then I'm going to have Egomotion signal that represent motion in that particular direction. And do you still have a question?
No.
Okay, good. So I mentioned that there are applications that would benefit for augmenting IMU, and I'm going to show you one of them. So we were contacted by a company called Boskalis. Boskalis does work in water infrastructure, so everything that is in the sea that can be big infrastructure, they build it and they monitor it and they maintain it. So they have to inspect it. And there are many situations for which they use huge remotely operated vehicle, and they have very skilled operators that are sitting in a vessel. They have a lot of screens, they have complex joysticks, and they are operating this vehicle. And this vehicle is going to go under the sea, it's going to have to navigate somewhere, do some task, and then come back. And they're very, very expensive. We're talking about millions. So you have to make sure that you're able to bring it back. They have very limited visual cues. This is what they see in one of their cameras. So they are navigating close to the floor of the sea, and that's what they see. So it's a really hard task, and whatever you can do to support their job is going to have a huge impact. So they ask us, can we apply our algorithm to improve the automatic tracking of where the vehicle is? And we don't have data from an event-based sensor yet for this application. So as a proof of principle, we use the V2E algorithm to translate these kind of videos in event-based data. Of course, it's not the perfect thing you're going to see when you would put the camera there, but understanding if the algorithm could work with this kind of data is already a good indication of what you can do in real life. So because of the kind of motion that they're doing, in this case, those are the two kind of filters that we implemented. Again, you always have the complementary and you always do the subtraction. And it's still very preliminary data, also because we don't have ground truth in this case. We only have the video and IMU data. But it's very promising. So this is the same kind of plots that we have seen before. You have time, you have the velocity in the two kind of filters, and the red is the algorithm using the match filters, and the black is the IMU. And then in the other plot, you can measure distance in the two directions, and then you can follow into what the vehicle was doing. So it's promising. We don't know yet. Now we are working in bringing this further with having real data from a sensor, first outside water and then in water. But it is a very interesting application that we are working on. And this is the last data I wanted to show, and it leads me to my conclusions. So I hope by now you are intrigued by this computational element that you probably didn't know before, and we call TDE, which, as I said, was applied to different sensory modalities. And you can find publications on the work done in the other that I didn't talk about today. The first one that we did was this sensory motor control loop for obstacle avoidance. And it was, I believe, like the first fully spiking closed loop system that was autonomously executing a task ever built. We put all this work in CMOS. We have shown that the CMOS can already show very promising results in terms of solving practical tasks. Also, for example, in terms of Egomotion estimation. And we went from very simple situation to very complex one with the match filters solution. So this is the end of this talk, but before coming here, while thinking about what kind of talk I should give here, there were two top candidates, and because I had to make a choice, I discarded the other top candidate, which is work we have done in CMOS design. So there's this paper published last year, a neuromorphic processor with on-chip learning for beyond CMOS device integration, where we have an array of neurons and synapses, somewhat similar to what you have seen in the Dynapse, but with the added feature of learning on chip and the possibility to integrate novel devices for maintaining a non-volatile memory of the synaptic state. So I highly encourage you to look into this paper if you're interested in these kind of topics. Of course, I would like to acknowledge the people involved in the work. So the work about obstacle avoidance was mostly carried out by a former PhD student in my group, Torben Schope, with other former members, Moritz Milde and Ella Gianotte. We did this in collaboration with Martin Egelaf at the Bielefeld University and a postdoc at that time in his group, Olivier Bertrand. While everything else is mostly work carried out by Hugh Greatorex, a current member of my group who just finished his PhD with a very brilliant thesis that also was granted a distinction. And of course, all the funding agency, and for the people coming from Manchester, the Spinnaker was an essential part in the work with the obstacle avoidance. And of course, I would like to thank you for your attention and let you know that we're hiring. So if you are or know a very good person looking for a PhD or postdoc, please get in touch with me. Thank you.